showing you the fashions of the time. So again, when you just looked at Nicole, you kind of saw that upper class thing. This is pretty much now coming down that one notch to well-dressed, well-respected, middling people. Mark and Samantha, what I like to do, what we know with a lot of folks, is if you can just kind of give your version of what you wear, how it's produced, and some of the nitty-gritty, that'd be good.
Of course, the larger populace of London in the 18th century was the working and middling sort of tradesmen and low merchants, or less wealthy merchants. And likewise, they also represented a large number of those that came to the New World. Though both Jamestown in 1607 and Henricus in 1611 had a fairly complete social range within them. The sort of clothing that we're wearing represents probably the most commonly seen European clothing in the New World in those early years of settlement. Establishing exactly what was worn in the New World is very difficult. Nothing survives. The earliest surviving American garments date from the mid-17th century, the mid-1600s. As the garments that we're wearing are based on a variety of other evidences besides surviving pieces. Archaeological finds are very important. So in my own clothing, many of the details, like the silver tips on what are called points. Points are ribbons or ties, actually I've got two of them here, that join garment pieces together. But while archaeologically the ribbon, the textile itself, does not survive below ground. Starting on one end, past them up. But the little silver tips that are on there, called aigulets, survive. And so that tells us something about the method of fastening the clothing, but it also tells us something about the caliber of the clothing, because these are silver, not the common brass or iron that are seen on others, so, on lower quality garments. So, as I said, these are copied from originals that were found in the vicinity of Jamestown. When you have the opportunity after this program, join us in Rock Hall next door where Samantha and I are working. And I can show you many other small details that are difficult to see in this light and in this environment that are based on those surviving objects. As I said, though, the textiles themselves don't generally survive. So we're sort of working backwards. We look at the detail, and we can figure out the sort of garments on which some of these things were worn. But other evidence, particularly written textual evidence, help us to understand the types of cloths that were being used here in the New World. So in my own suit, my doublet is made of a wool called broadcloth. Broadcloth is a wide woven, thus its name, broad cloth, and well-fulled fabric. Fulling is the process of taking a woven cloth and putting a felted finish on top of it by napping the surface and then pressing it. This is rapidly, in the early 17th century, becoming one of the important staples of English manufacture and commerce. And so it was a relatively fashionable cloth, and in the early 17th century still relatively costly, but not beyond the price of the large middling sort. Better quality broadcloths will be worn amongst the elite, the true gentry. My doublet is lined in at its tassets here and at the cuff here. Silk. Now England is not producing silk in the 17th century, so from where would it come? China, or Persia, or particularly at this moment, the Ottoman Empire. What you would think of as modern Turkey. And so there is a global trade that's bringing goods to London and therefore here to the New World. the cloths worn here were not made here, and they were not all made in England. But they're coming from all over the world, through England, through London in particular, to be used here. And with that comes other styles, not just fabric and details, but new styles of clothing. My breeches, called Venetians, are a good indication of that. So from where would you expect them to have originated? Venice, in Italy. There's a strong relationship between the court of England and the court of Italy at this time. And Italy's prominence in that world trade, particularly with the Ottoman trade, makes them very powerful merchants, very powerful politically, and at the time largely the arbiters of fashion as well. So the 17th century America is not isolated. It's part of a massive global empire that has trade all across the world, and these things are seen in the clothing worn even at this middling level of society. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I am essentially Mark's female counterpoint. I am also wearing an outfit of wool, and it's trimmed with wool as well. It is a doublet style bodice, the same as Mark's, but it has been cut and fit over my undergarments, which give my body a very particular shape. And as lovely as the outer clothes are, I'm actually going to take this off so you can see what's underneath, because that's as important as what I'm wearing on top. Now, in the 17th century, before that and after, up until what we think of as the Victorian era, there isn't the same view of undergarments as being inappropriate to be seen. So if it is particularly warm, I can be out working in my pair of bodies or bodice and my smock here. I'm also going to remove the petticoat so that you can see the rest of the bodice, as well as the roll that I'm wearing around my hips. Now, this is quite modest compared to the farthingale that is worn in very high fashions in court that can reach this far as a woman's arms can reach, stretching out sort of like a drum all the way around her. So this is a very modest form of that. It's just a linen roll that's stuffed with wool. You can see my smock can fasten at the neck, comes to the wrists, and ends mid-calf. It's a very simple garment constructed out of rectangles and triangles, and this is a woman's very basic undergarment. She has many of these in her wardrobe. She wears a different one every day, effectually cleaning herself by changing out the linens. So while we may not submerge ourselves in a bath to bathe, we are bathing through our body linen, essentially. The boned garment that I'm wearing, like I said, that I'm caught in, it's referred to as a pair of bodies or bodies. It is, you can think of it as sort of the great-great-great-grandmother of what will become the corset in the 19th century. However, you'll notice that it doesn't give me an hourglass shape. It actually gives me a very conical shape, and it has a very long point in front. So the fashion during this period is to have a very long conical torso. The pair of bodies are very comfortable. Mine are boned with reed, so they have formed to my figure. So I have formed them more than they've formed me, essentially. So we are tight lacing because we do still have to work to a certain degree, and they give excellent support to a woman's chest and back as well. So even if you are doing hard physical labor, this is actually going to help your body the same way that you might wear a back brace today. You sometimes see people in factories or, say, Home Depot wearing those black back braces that are quite snug. So a well-fitting pair of bodies should fit like a good pair of shoes. You don't want your shoes to be loose and flopping around everywhere. You want them to be snug so that they provide support to your foot, and that's the same way with the pair of bodies. Now, this garment being a separate upper body garment is actually a relatively new development. at the turn of the 17th century. You first start seeing pairs of bodies come in 1580s to 1590s, and all of the extant or surviving pairs of bodies that we have come from about that period, including a pair of bodies that was made for the effigy of Queen Elizabeth after her death. So we have a vague idea of her size and her shape and the clothes that were made for her and that she wore. The pair that I'm wearing are actually based off of a circa 1600 portrait of Elizabeth Vernon. So a very interesting and rare glimpse of a woman at her toilette. So either undressing or dressing for the day. She's wearing her pair of bodies, she's wearing her petticoat and wearing her smock, as well as a waistcoat. So one of the rare glimpses that we get into the things that are going under the clothing.
When Samantha and I first came in, before she took the clothing off, you may have noticed one element that was virtually identical between the two of us. Anybody notice it? Walking is different. So you walk sort of duck-footed in the 17th century, toes turned outward, and feet landing flat on the floor. That was observant. But actually, someone here commented that our hats are virtually identical sorts. These hats are very important to 17th century English fashion. They're almost a national symbol of England, but not just England itself. Any idea what a good hat is made? Up until about 1608, well, actually a little bit earlier, up until about 1600, for the past couple of centuries, all English hats have been made in wool. Wool is largely the backbone of the English economy, but prior to wool hats being dominant, European castor had been the preferential fur to be felted into hats. The last beaver in England, however, was killed in 1351. So where in the world, literally where in the world, is England getting beaver to make hats from? Yes, the New World, here. And so a beaver hat, like the one that I'm wearing, is to the early 17th century English eye not only a statement of fashion and the importance of London, but it's a symbol of England's global empire and its trade with the New World. And of course, it's Native Americans here in the New World that are providing much of that beaver through English settlements, both here in Virginia and in Massachusetts. Furs were the great wealth of the northern colonies, while tobacco rapidly became the wealth of the southern colonies. But when you have an opportunity, in just a moment, notice the same fur in a different state on the native individuals. So, afterwards, please join us outside for questions, and back in Rock Hall where we're working on a doublet this afternoon. We hope to see you there.
Pocket.